We're going to talk about some of the dementias today and talk about what they are, what they aren't, and you've sort of begun thinking about them over, the last couple of videos. Remember seeing Stan very profoundly affected, can't even remember what he did, although you notice some of the confabulations that he made where when his daughter said, "Oh yeah, you did this," he said, "Oh yeah, I remember." Remember the woman in the video on the neuropsych assessments and some of the difficulties that you see there. So in general, for the disorders that we're going to be looking at today, they all start with a diagnosis of major neurocognitive disorder, and then there are specific neurocognitive disorders. In each of them, there is evidence of significant cognitive decline from previous performance. Remember, that's ruling out mental retardation, for example, or a learning disability, etc. And you see that in one or more cognitive domains based on either the concern of the individual or somebody else, or a substantial impairment in cognitive performance, that's generally documented by some sort of testing. These cognitive deficits interfere with independence in everyday activities, and they're not better explained by another mental disorder. So, for example, it's not the result of schizophrenia, it's not the result of depression, it's not the result of cancer, it's not the result of some substance. You notice that for Alzheimer's disease, we're talking about both the criteria met for either major or minor neurocognitive disorder, and so look at both of those. There is an insidious and onset, you don't even notice it. That's an important part. And that there is a gradual progression in one or more cognitive domains. It is probable Alzheimer's if there is either evidence of family history of Alzheimer's or some sort of genetic testing that suggests that, or there is clear evidence of a decline in memory and learning, and at least one other cognitive domain. It's steadily progressive, gradual decline. And that part there is really different from, for example, after a stroke. And no evidence of, some sort of cognitive or of some sort of cerebrovascular disease that might cause that. Now, again, in D, we're paying attention to all those rule-outs, the other kinds of diseases, the other kinds of, or the substances, the neurological, systemic, psychological diseases that might cause, the cognitive dementia. This is from your book, so I'm only going to talk about it very briefly, but notice how this is comparing different disorders. And notice how we can compare these and see what kinds of different rule-outs there might be. And that there are going to be different kinds of functioning, different ways of responding for each. So, for example, with delirium, it happens fairly quickly, fluctuating, and then gone. Where dementia tends to be gradual and progressive, not generally reversible, while delirium is. Or the diagnosis of dementia is diagnosed more frequently with increasing age, women more than men. Early signs and symptoms, that a person might notice include memory loss that disrupts their daily life, challenges in planning or solving problems, difficulty completing familiar tasks at home, at work, leisure, confusion with time or place. Remember the story that I told about walking with someone on a very hot August day, and he thought that it was Christmas. Trouble understanding visual images and spatial relationships that are different from what had been the case in the past. New problems with words and speak, or with words either in normal speech or in writing. Misplacing things, losing the ability to retrace steps. So, for example, earlier this morning, I lost my Fitbit and was thinking about how to find it. And I'm there trying to go back and thinking about where I might have left it, and found it. Decreased or poor judgment. So, for example, one of your grandparents might go out in their slippers in December. Withdrawal from work or social activities, things that they had previously enjoyed. Changes in mood and personality, and often, but not always, often with Alzheimer's, you may see greater irritability or greater problems with anger. In terms of structure, one of the things that you're going to see is loss of brain tissue, particularly in the frontal lobe. And so we're going to see increased gaps between the gyri of the cortex. We're also going to see that the ventricles are bigger. We're going to see neurofibrillary tangles. We're also going to see senile plaques, which are deposits of beta amyloid proteins that are found in the spaces between the cells. I pointed out, the changes in, here's our gyri, or the hills, and the solstice is the valley. And you notice the greater gaps here between them as opposed to here. And you saw that in the last video when we were looking at MRIs. You also see that the ventricles here are much bigger than over here. So this is our normal brain in the person with Alzheimer's. And notice how that may affect memory and language. These are two different parts of the brain associated with both cognitive tasks affected there. Here you're seeing both tangles and plaques. The plaques being the accumulation of beta amyloid proteins. In terms of etiology, there's some suggestion of genetic pieces, and some Alzheimer's can be picked up through genetic testing. We're seeing mutations on chromosomes 1, 14, 19, and 21 associated with early onset Alzheimer's. There's also a high concordance rate in twins, 75% in monozygotic or identical twins, as opposed to fraternal twins, suggesting a much high or a fairly high genetic basis. Biochemically, we're seeing problems with acetylcholine and glutamates, buildup of beta amyloid proteins, some oxidative stress, and less acetylcholine and serotonin and dopamine. So in this figure, what you see are the effects of diet and other kinds of toxins that may affect amyloid precursor proteins, and genetic pieces can also do that. And that may cause some problems in insoluble beta amyloids. This causes senile plaques, neurofibrillary tangles, oxidative stress and free radicals, and brain inflammation, causing changes at a neurochemical level, neuronal level, and brain atrophy, leading to cognitive decline and dementia. So you notice here some of the acetylcholine pathways that are affected by Alzheimer's. The hippocampus and seems to be very involved with memory and cerebral cortex in terms of some of the higher cognitive function. When you listen to people, they often say so-and-so has Alzheimer's. And what they often mean is they have some sort of dementia. And yet there are a number of different kinds of diseases that lead to dementia. Vascular disease or stroke. So often there is a stroke that affects here in terms of language function and also the opposite side of the body. That can also affect other kinds of cognitive functioning. AIDS can, in its final stages, can cause some dementia. Parkinson's, Pick's disease, Lewy bodies, and Korsakoff's. Korsakoff's is a disease caused or seen primarily in alcoholics that may cause some really severe impairments on short-term memory. Vascular dementia. Generally, we're seeing structural changes in the brain and areas of dead or dying brain. And you saw that in the last slide. Generally it appears to be related to high blood pressure, arteriosclerosis, leakage of blood into the brain, which both starves some parts of the brain and floods others. Blockage of an artery by a blood clot or arteriosclerotic plaque. Depression is often an associated problem. Let me take you in a different direction. Sometimes, particularly with the elderly, we may see some depressive pseudodementia. Pseudodementia meaning that it's not dementia, but it looks like it. And so any of a number of things can cause depression, declining health, loss of job, loss of family members, loss of a spouse, and that depression can sometimes lead to cognitive impairments. And so one of the things that you want to be ruling out is that it's not something else. Now, one of the things that you should be thinking about throughout the semester is an issue of competency, which is part of being ethical in our approach to our work. Think about what you would need to be competent to diagnose dementia. And I think both here and in other parts of the course, part of what we need to know is something about disease processes. We need to know also about medicines and how those medicines may affect functioning. We may need to know what is typical for a healthy adult and what isn't. Also think about what sorts of training you could gain to become more competent. And take care.